Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Stitch Day. Yes, since today is June 26th, fans of Lilo and Stitch use this day to celebrate this fluffy blue abomination Stitch, or Experiment 626. I was so excited when I found out this was a thing, because I am a huge Lilo and Stitch fan. The original movie is one I hold very close to my heart, and it's meant a lot to me ever since I saw it when I was a kid. I even saw Stitch the movie just in time for a TV series to be released. So, with 4 pretty well received movies out there and a 65 episode TV show, which are we going to talk about? None of them! Today, let's talk about the Stitch anime. To answer your first question, yes, this exists. And if you've seen it or heard about it, chances are you clicked on this video waiting for me to say how I absolutely despise this show for ruining my childhood. But that's not really my thing. I actually think this show is pretty good. Undeniably flawed, but still good. Now, the first thing that everybody addresses when talking about this show is that Lilo is no longer in it, and instead has been replaced by this girl, Yuna. But you know what? There are a lot of other things that happen in the show, and they warrant just as much discussion. So let's go over those first and save the Lilo situation for the end. Okay? Okay. Now, on to the show. The show starts with Stitch being pursued by the Galactic Federation and Jumba because he's been wreaking havoc in space for reasons I'll go more into later. During this chase, he crashes back onto Earth, but this time on a small island off the coast of Japan. After causing some more havoc on the island, Stitch is confronted by Yuna, who tries to fight him with her karate skills to defend her town. It's actually cooler than it sounds. After some shenanigans and sentimental moments, Stitch decides to stay on the island with Yuna and her grandmother. After that, Jumba, now joined by Pleakley, also crashes on the island, and they both decide to stay as well to keep an eye on Stitch. Which is going to be an even more important job because Stitch discovers something in the forest called the Spiritual Stone, which will grant anyone a wish if they complete a certain amount of good deeds. Stitch wants to complete this task so he can wish for ultimate power, but it turns out to be difficult for him, being the walking hurricane that he is. We also have Dr. Hamsterville back with plans to once again take over the galaxy. And he also has Gantu and Ruben working for him again. We'll get back to that. Probably the most noticeable difference in the anime is the introduction of yokai and other mythical creatures. Yeah, apparently yokai exist in the Lilo and Stitch universe. Now, I don't really have a problem with the yokai themselves. I find yokai pretty fascinating, and incorporating that mythology does work in other franchises. But it just doesn't seem to fit with this franchise. I don't know, I just find it kind of hard to believe that spirits and magic exist in the same world as these aliens, especially considering they bring some of Stitch's cousins back. Although, besides Stitch and Ruben, in the first season there's only 3, Sparky, Angel, and Felix. Once you get to season 2, they brought in more of the experiments to cause havoc for various reasons, but the yokai were still around. So I think the biggest problem with the anime is a lack of focus, especially in season 1, that has episodes that could range from returning experiments, to new yokai, to even just very basic slice-of-life stories. And with a couple of exceptions like the season 1 finale, which is actually really cool, rarely do these story elements intersect, so it can seem like you're watching 2 completely different shows. Because of this, season 1 is easily the toughest season to get through. But once we get to season 2 with the returning experiments, the show is a lot more focused and a lot of fun. And while some of the rules and functions of the experiments sometimes contradict the original show, it makes up for it by being able to go a step further with its storytelling because of the difference in genre. There's an episode in season 2 where Remy, an experiment who turns people's dreams into nightmares, returns. When we last saw him, he was left to be part of a scary video game in an arcade. So when he returns to wreak havoc, all of the obstacles and the nightmares he creates are video game themed. It's a cool idea, and coupled with some emotional moments, it makes for a great episode. Even though the reasons for the experiments attacking again can sometimes come off as thought of at the last minute, it makes up for it with action-packed and sometimes emotional adventures. Now that we're in the anime world, the action scenes are way more elaborate. They're probably not that special by anime standards, but it's a great improvement from the original show, which, let's be honest guys, were nothing to write home about. Here, they're quicker, more expressive, and much, much more dynamic. There are a few good examples of episodes that use both action and emotion with great effect. Like the season 1 finale we discussed earlier, where Hamsterville comes pretty close to winning, the return of Plute, an experiment who causes pollution, Amnesio, who steals people's memories, and this show even introduces new experiments like Wormhole, who creates a, well, wormhole that transports Stitch and Yuna to a parallel world where Stitch is a planet-conquering villain. This one in particular takes full advantage of its premise. awesome action scenes with a wonderful story, and it's one of my favorites in the series. Now, there is a season 3 to the show, but we'll go into that more as we go along. Let's take a break to talk about some of the characters. Like the original series, we have to have rival kids to bully Yuna. This is Penny. She's Myrtle, except somehow more annoying and entitled. And there's also her brother Kenny, who, oddly enough, is played by the same guy who played another kid named Ken in the dub of Digimon 02. Just something I noticed. Then we have our returning villains, Hamsterville and Gantu. Now, this may sound weird to some of you, but what they did to Gantu is probably my biggest issue with the anime. Gantu had a great character revelation in the final movie of the franchise. He joined the good guys, and by doing so, he got his position as captain of the Galactic Armada back, even let Ruben come with him. But here, he's just back to being Hamsterville's minion. Also, Ruben is there, and from the episodes I've seen, he doesn't seem to display any of the skills he picked up in Leroy and Stitch. I'm not sure if there's an explanation for any of this in the Japanese version, but the dub gave a really lame reason. Why'd they even need to bring Gantu back as a bad guy? I think this would have worked better if Hamsterville came back with a different minion to do his dirty work, and maybe have Gantu return every now and then as an ally for some of the bigger battles. I should mention that in Season 3, Hamsterville becomes the minion of a greater villain named Delia, who was apparently one of the most threatening beings in the galaxy and hasn't been mentioned before this point because sequel. I'm not sure how her season-long story arc develops because I haven't seen the entirety of Season 3, but despite this story coming out of nowhere, this was a dynamic I liked. Having Hamsterville being knocked down a peg and constantly being yelled at and bullied by someone more powerful than him. And I really wish they did this through the whole series, instead of bringing Gantu and Ruben back to square one after all the accomplishments they had at the end of the original show. But you know what makes up for this little bitter disappointment? The return of Jumba and Pleakley. These two are just as much fun as they were before. I am a huge fan of these guys, so I was so happy to see them return and be just as funny and entertaining as they've always been. They probably got the best replacement voice actors as well. In fact, Jumba's voice actor has a lot of credits with Lilo and Stitch besides this, including co-writing 2 of the movies. And whatever you think Jumba and Pleakley's relationship actually is, they act more like an old married couple here than ever before, and it's the best. Now let's talk about our new co-star, Yuna. A lot of people don't like her, mostly because she replaced Lilo, but like I said, we'll get to that towards the end. But I actually kind of like Yuna. If she was just Lilo 2.0, then I would have a problem with this. But while she can be a bit weird and eccentric, it's not really in the same way as Lilo. She's not into weird bugs or monster movies. She's a disciplined little girl who's really good at karate and is a bit too curious for her own good. Especially when Stitch comes around. And because of her karate skills, Yuna is a pretty competent fighter. Heck, in the first episode, she holds her own in a fight against Stitch. That's pretty impressive. Sure, she sometimes plays the damsel in distress role, but she makes up for it by being proactive and sometimes even saving the day on her own, which is pretty cool. But as the show goes on, Yuna opens up too. Like I said, Yuna is a very disciplined girl, and she tries to stay in control of a situation. Because of this, she tends to hide her emotions or lashes out at Stitch or someone else who didn't deserve it because she has trouble processing certain feelings. Yuna's mother passed away long before the series began, and her father has a job that keeps him away from home and has him constantly rescheduling visits. Yuna has taught herself to try and not be disappointed or angry when the world throws something at her. Sure, she'll get annoyed at Penny and will get mad if someone blasts Stitch in the face, but any deeper emotion, especially connected to her family, she tries to hide. But since she's still a kid, all of them burst out in inappropriate ways. Especially when Stitch comes along and starts telling her just how important Ohana is. She gets annoyed the first few times he does this, but then slowly realizes that he's right. And Yuna grows a lot by just having Stitch be a part of her life and taking her on such fantastic adventures. That's not to say Yuna's perfect, she's not. She can be selfish, competitive, and like I said, she's prone to emotional outbursts. But hey, every character has flaws, right? For me, Yuna has a nice balance and never really goes too far. And I think she has a nice bond with Stitch. Their relationship is a bit different than what Stitch had with Lilo. They tease each other and are very competitive, trying to one-up each other. Something that, with a few exceptions, wasn't really a part of Lilo and Stitch's relationship. But again, this isn't Lilo 2.0, and it's a different character dynamic that I can get behind. But that doesn't mean that they don't care about each other. Far from it. They forge a friendship pretty quickly, but learning to actually get along on a day-to-day basis takes a while longer. But every time this show has thrown something touching or sad related to these two, I feel it. I totally buy it. These two have some very sweet moments, and each makes me think of them more and more as family. Stitch is not only relearning what he learned on Hawaii, but is passing on those lessons to someone who really needed them. And once season 3 starts and they move to the big city, for some reason, they've become such a great team who work really well together. So I'm okay with Yuna being a part of Stitch's extended ohana. But what happened to his most important family member? Time to finally address the giant elephant in the room. What happened to Lilo? Well, if you watched the first episode of the dub out of curiosity, you probably heard this.
Just because little girl Lilo has a new boyfriend now and is all washed up with 626.
And then were immediately outraged. And I'll admit, if this was the real explanation, I would be too. However, this is only in the dub. In fact, in the Japanese version of the first 2 episodes, Lilo isn't mentioned at all. My best guess as to what exactly happened here is that the people in charge of the dub rightfully assumed that people would wonder what happened to Lilo, and since the episode with her return wasn't out yet, the dub just kind of gave it their best guess. So if you only saw the first episode and weren't thrilled with how they just wrote Lilo out, you can be sure it was a dub edit. Okay, so what really happened? Well, when Lilo was spotted by Stitch in season 3, Pleakley tells Yuna that Lilo went away to college while Stitch went away on a mission for the Galactic Federation. After being away from each other for 4 years, Stitch returns to the spot they agreed to meet at. But after searching and searching, Lilo was nowhere to be found. So Stitch was so sad and angry that he ran away and began wreaking havoc that apparently kept going until the beginning of the series. Some people think this means that Lilo abandoned Stitch after she left for college. Well, that's not what happened either. Apparently the girl who Stitch reunites with in Japan was actually Lilo's daughter, and Lilo is about to leave the island once they figure this out. So with Yuna's help, Stitch catches up with Lilo at the airport, and here's where we learn that Lilo couldn't make it to meet Stitch because Nani had had a baby, and Lilo couldn't get away. When she got there a couple days later, all she found was Stitch's tiki necklace, and she was heartbroken. So you're right, Lilo would never abandon Stitch. And she didn't. It was a huge misunderstanding. But the best part is that neither of them are upset about what happened. Even before Lilo explains herself, Stitch was so happy to see her again, and Lilo was too. It's such a heartwarming reunion, and it's made even better when it's revealed that Lilo still has Stitch's tiki necklace with her, and has presumably kept it this whole time. But some people also take issue with the fact that even after this, Stitch stays in Japan with Yuna. But it kind of reminds me of Toy Story 3. Where Andy gives all of his toys to a new girl despite the fact they still mean a lot to him, because he just doesn't need them as much anymore, and they could make another kid as happy as they made him, which is an idea that Woody, Buzz, and the rest of the toys are all for. Lilo and Stitch's reunion showed how much they still love and care about each other, and that will never change. But Lilo has grown up. When she was a kid, Stitch was her only friend and came to her at a very dark time in her life. But now, Lilo is a functioning adult with a child of her own. She doesn't need Stitch as much as she did before, and that's not a bad thing. Because Lilo wouldn't have turned out this way without Stitch. And as I mentioned before, Yuna has also become a stronger person by being with Stitch. Just because Stitch doesn't live with Lilo anymore doesn't mean he loves her any less. Just like how the Doctor parting ways with his companions and moving on to the next one doesn't mean he cares about the ones who came before any less. Or how Andy still giving away his toys doesn't mean they weren't important to him. So no, I don't mind Lilo and Stitch aren't together anymore. But only because of this scene. It's such a touching moment to show how special their friendship is and how it will never truly be broken that it still makes me tear up happily. And I don't care how that sounds, how pathetic it might be, it's how I feel. Of course, if you don't like the anime, that's fine. Even if you hate it, that's fine. But I really do like it. Look, I'm not going to say that this was a story that desperately needed to be told. In fact, the finale of the original show is one of the more satisfying series finales I've seen, so I wasn't begging for a sequel. It's pretty obvious why this show exists. Like some other Disney characters, Stitch is huge in Japan. The little monster is on all sorts of merchandise over there, so I'd assume this anime was made to promote Stitch as a brand. This becomes so obvious at one point that there's an episode where Stitch and the others just go to Disneyland. Not like a Disneyland-like theme park, just actual Tokyo Disneyland in animated form with a lot of Disney references. And I am not immune to fan rage. I've been burned by some of my favorite franchises before, but for what this is, it could have been a lot worse. While there are things in this show I do have problems with, it still manages to be funny, action-packed, and even touching. I'm not against the idea of Lilo growing up and Stitch finding someone else to form a bond with who actually does need him as much as Lilo used to. Because really, isn't that what Lilo and Stitch is about? Finding family in places you never would have imagined? Becoming part of something bigger than yourself? Realizing your inner strength through the love and support of others? These are themes that are alive and well in the Stitch anime. If this made you curious to see what the show is like, I say check it out. Hopefully I helped defend the show for the people who do like it, and to those who still don't, just close your eyes, sing Aloha Oi, and consider it non-canon. So, happy Stitch Day everyone! Thanks for watching, and until next time, aloha!